She was already grounded when the orders came in. No rank, no clearance. Just her name flagged in the system and a tail number that hadn't flown active in over 20 years. At first, no one understood why an old A-10 Warthog was even moving across their radar grid. The response was by the book detain, verify, escort. The woman at the controls said little. She didn't resist. And then everything changed. Someone in the tower recognized the tail number. Someone else remembered the doctrine it helped create. What began as a standard intercept turned into something else entirely, a return, not a violation. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story intrigues you, please consider subscribing to hear more untold stories of extraordinary service and the heroes who walk among us, never asking for the recognition they deserve. The A-10 moved like a storm cloud with wings, low and wide and old enough to be forgotten by most radar operators. Kelly sat steady in the cockpit, her gloved hands resting lightly on the controls. The air outside rippled with desert heat, and the canopy glass shimmered with light distortions as the terrain below fractured into pale ridges and abandoned range markers. Every vibration in the airframe was familiar to her. She didn't flinch when the stick trembled against her palm, or when the throttle whispered a memory through its soft resistance. She had spent 3 years rebuilding this aircraft. She knew what it meant to trust something that others had written off. Her father's patch, sun-faded and stitched to a small strip of Velcro above the throttle panel, hadn't moved since the morning she first launched it solo. His name was never spoken during the rebuild. His legacy wasn't public, but the aircraft carried it. Tail number 880914. That was the only marking that needed to endure. She wasn't supposed to be in this airspace. That much became clear when the first warning came through the headset. The voice was clipped, neutral, and official. Unidentified aircraft. You are entering restricted training airspace. Change heading immediately. Kelly blinked against the light and reached forward to adjust her bearing, but the terrain below had already slipped into a zone marked off on her sectional chart. She'd flown into the outer edge of it without realizing. The ridgeline had drawn her in. Her attention had drifted. The flight wasn't for navigation. It was for memory. She keyed the mic. Voice, even. Civilian aircraft. November 3814. Charlie. I am correcting course now and request permission to exit zone at heading 220. There was a pause. The second voice was colder. Negative. November 3814. Charlie. You are in breach of restricted airspace protocol. Hold current position. You will be escorted to base perimeter. Comply immediately. A dot appeared in the corner of her canopy glass, fast and climbing. Then another, F-16s, sleek and sharp, cutting in from the east like silver fish drawn to heat. Kelly kept her hands steady. The Warthog responded with a low groan of its turbines. Not resisting, but not hiding either. She didn't speak again. There was no point. The lead F-16 pilot keyed in with the tone of someone addressing an annoyance. Ma'am, you flying that brick on purpose? This your first time in military airspace or just sightseeing? Another pilot chimed in, his voice young and clipped with laughter. Somebody get a museum crew on standby. This relic's about to scratch the paint off our grid. Kelly didn't respond. Her A-10 held position just inside the boundary line, altitude unchanged. Her boots pressed against the rudder pedals like they always had, not braced, but patient. Over the radio, one of the intercept pilots continued. Visual confirms it's an A-10. Old frame, odd markings. Looks civilian mod, probably a custom rebuild. She's way off chart. Copy that. Treat as low-risk civilian incursion. We'll walk her to the fence. Kelly watched one of the fighters close in on her left wing, the heat shimmer of its exhaust catching across her canopy. The contrast was comical. The F-16 looked like it had been polished by a sponsorship deal. Her aircraft bore sun-dulled skin, soft lines of patch welds, a belly streaked with repair seals and hand-labeled panels. But it held together. It always had. She tapped a button on her dash, toggling the data mode on her analog display. A low beep echoed through the cockpit. The instrument stayed green. One of the pilots adjusted position, his shadow crossing her fuselage. Nice tail number. Ma'am. Can't tell if it's original or just meant to look vintage. That a tribute plane or something. Still, she said nothing. The silence over the comms stretched. Then the voice came again, more dismissive. Look, I don't know if this is some kind of stunt, but this airspace is hot right now. We're running live fire drills on the far end. You're lucky we picked you up before range lock. Stay tight and don't deviate. You're being logged as a procedural intercept. Kelly adjusted her heading slightly. The Warthog complied with a heavy sigh of thrust, her left wing leveling in the updraft. Outside, the terrain shifted into wide tan canyons and strips of scrub. She recognized it from the early flight charts her father used to keep rolled in the toolbox at home. There had been a time when this range was open access. Then it became part of something else. Through the canopy, she watched the F-16s reposition. Their formation had tightened. One sat at 2 o'clock, another behind her starboard engine wash. The message was clear. Comply or be forced down. She didn't argue. She flew. On the ground. Someone in the tower had already flagged her flight ID as an anomaly. A silent chain of command was beginning to spool up behind her, but she couldn't hear it yet. All she knew was that the jet, old as it was, still answered to her hand with grace. The systems worked. The air held. The memory carried. Above her, the sun angled sharp off the F-16's polished body. Her own shadow passed beneath in the canyon. From the ground, it would look like an escort. From the air, it looked like containment. Kelly reached for her flight gloves, adjusting the edge of the seam along her left wrist. They were worn, but still strong. She had broken them in years ago, during her first night engine test. The gloves, like the aircraft, weren't new, but they had lasted. The voice came again, final and routine. Civilian aircraft, November 3814, Charlie. Prepare for escort to grid perimeter. You are not authorized to continue independent flight. Hold current heading. Do not engage transponder. You are now under escort control. Kelly confirmed with a short tone key. She followed the formation. Behind her, stenciled in faded black along the fuselage, the number 880914 reflected briefly in the glare. None of the pilots had looked closely enough yet. None of them had paused to see it for what it was. She flew on, unaware that within minutes, everything around her would change. The air around her had leveled into a wide, humming calm. The F-16s stayed in tight formation now, engines whispering power just outside her field of view. From a distance, the scene might have looked like a drill or a training escort. From inside the cockpit, it felt like the edge of something unspoken. Kelly didn't need their approval to fly. She had never asked for it. But even here, bracketed by youth and technology, she flew steady because it mattered. The Warthog moved with her like it had been built for no one else. The airframe knew her grip. The throttle met her pressure like it had been waiting years to be used properly again. She didn't overcorrect. She didn't chase the intercepts with her eyes. Her focus stayed on the horizon and the rhythm of the machine around her. The checklists lived in her head now, but she still reached down out of habit to tap the folded card near her thigh. The handwriting had faded, slanted block letters from another time. Her father's ink, his exact flight notes, written the day before the mission they never spoke about, creased once down the middle, folded again, then laminated with scotch tape and fuel grime. She never took it out. She just made sure it was there. She checked her gauges. Fuel flow was steady. Pressure held at 100.0. The altimeter ticked slightly as the terrain beneath her dipped into a long basin. The F-16s adjusted to match her angle. One of them edged closer, but the radios stayed quiet now. She had answered their sarcasm with nothing, and the silence unsettled them more than defiance ever would. Inside the A-10, the hum of analog systems mixed with the low drone of twin engines. The aircraft didn't fly like the new fighters. It didn't snap or twist. It flowed. The weight carried through her hands. The trim controls held their shape. She could feel the tension in the belly tanks before the indicator warned her. She could feel wind resistance tighten around the frame when the pressure fronts shifted ahead of the range wall. Flying this Warthog wasn't performance. It was presence. On the right console, near the bottom of the diagnostics panel, a soft green light blinked twice. Then it held. Kelly didn't see it at first. The IFF response light was an old fixture half covered in dust, long marked as inoperative. She had once considered removing it during the rebuild, but something told her to leave it, to test it only once the aircraft was fully alive again. She didn't know the signal had activated. She had touched nothing. The system had recognized its own operating environment military range, cross-grid comms traffic, active radar scan, and pinged its ghost protocol without instruction. The aircraft still carried the legacy ID, buried behind the current transponder code. It was a subroutine written 2 decades earlier, installed after the operation that had given tail number 880914 its place in classified doctrine. The signal didn't identify Kelly by name, it just transmitted one word. Rourke. Inside the base command tower, a radar technician leaned forward in confusion, his screen lit with a blue overlay, not red. A nameplate that hadn't been active in over 20 years pulsed on the secondary monitor. Protocol Rourke. Reference file. 1, Delta 5, status legacy, access triggered. He called for the supervisor. Another technician confirmed. The signal wasn't spoofed. It had arrived through hardware authentication embedded in the aircraft's original signature code. The file access required command-level authorization. They logged the alert, tagged the aircraft's tail number, and requested escalation. Then they waited. None of them had ever seen a ghost ping activate before. Kelly adjusted altitude slightly. The Warthog responded with a comfortable dip. The desert below broke into brush fields and strips of sand-etched stone. The colors reminded her of early training loops in the West, where her father used to circle high above canyons just to feel the silence settle across the wings. He always said the A-10 wasn't built for glory. It was built to return, over and over, until the job was done. In the escort pattern, the lead F-16 remained slightly above her left line, holding position like a sentry. No more jokes came across the radio. No new warnings. Just quiet airspace and the steady pulse of escorted flight. At base operations, an officer began cross-checking the protocol code against historical mission records. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard before she typed in the tail number, 880914. The system unlocked a flagged archive, redacted lines, combat notations, satellite overlays from an unnamed canyon, a flight logged under blackout conditions, mission result successful extraction, all personnel recovered, casualties 0, call sign, Monarch Actual, Pilot Major Paul Rourke. Below the image, a photo remained untouched by classification, a flight line group, all helmets off. At the center stood a man with oil on his sleeves and a tired smile. Beside him, a child held one glove in her hand. Kelly. The operations officer called the watch commander. The commander requested full identification. Clearance code was granted. An alert pinged command-level contacts. Kelly's flight continued uninterrupted. She didn't know her name had re-entered the chain of command. She didn't know the systems she passed had already begun to shift from warning to welcome. She only knew the aircraft was flying right, that the air was smooth, that the silence behind her was no longer disrespectful. It was the pause that happens just before memory wakes up. The F-16 pilot shifted position slightly, angling his aircraft a few feet closer to the A-10. He wasn't concerned. The old airframe ahead of him moved slow and heavy, its matte gray surface streaked with wear, its control input soft like someone steering a tugboat through desert air. He keyed his mic again with the tone of someone who thought this escort was still a joke. Lead to tower. Confirm visual on the A-10. Looks like an aftermarket patch job. Not military active. This one's probably somebody's flight museum special. The voice that replied from the ground came without inflection. Copy. Lead. Continue escort pattern until boundary. Base command still confirming details. He rolled his eyes. Unseen inside the helmet. The F-16 leveled against the horizon as he eased into the left shoulder of the old Warthog. He squinted through the canopy glass, trying to get a read on the pilot. It was hard to see inside, but the figure looked calm, hands steady, gaze forward. No gestures, no panic, no rookie behavior, just flying the line. Think she even knows what airspace she's in? His wingman asked over comms. No clue. Probably testing her hobby project. These old birds fly like bricks. Nothing like ours. He dropped a few feet for a better angle. His HUD danced with ambient data, but the close proximity required visual confirmation. His gaze scanned the fuselage, tracing its panels out of habit. Some markings had been painted over, others were faded. Then he saw it. Stenciled in black, right above the left wing root. Weather-worn but perfectly readable. 880914. He blinked. For a second, the number didn't register. It just sat there, meaningless. Then the shape of it filtered through years of repetition. Flight school stories, instructor references, a case study embedded in the first week of historical doctrine. He froze. Say again, his wingman asked. The pilot didn't answer. He stared at the number, his visor suddenly too bright. The cold in his gut spread like a vacuum pulling all air out of the moment. He fumbled for the mic. Tower. Confirm tail number on target aircraft. Tail confirmed. 880914. Repeat. 880914. There was silence. The pilot's voice, when it came, cracked through the channel. Control. I request immediate status hold on this flight. Cancel all aggressive protocol. We are escorting an aircraft tied to Protocol Rourke. The name hit the channel like a siren no one wanted to hear. His wingman shifted uneasily. Say again, lead. It's canyon hold, the pilot whispered. That's the tail. That's the bird. In the back seat of the second fighter, a systems officer brought up the protocol database, searching the number with trembling fingers. The alert lit in yellow. Confirmed. Rourke extraction flight. 25 years classified. 1 Warthog. 1 impossible canyon run. Every soul recovered. Jesus, the officer muttered. She's flying it. It's really here. The first pilot stared at the A-10 like it had materialized from a myth. He no longer saw the patched paint or the mismatched panels. He saw the shadow of a story that had been passed down like scripture, the kind that instructors told with reverence and cadets assumed had been exaggerated. No one exaggerated Canyon Hold. It had been the mission that changed the doctrine, the one that proved the Warthog could thread terrain where helicopters failed, the one where Major Paul Rourke disappeared into radio silence and emerged with 6 downed pilots strapped to stretchers in the bay. The aircraft had been declared unflyable, but it flew. The first pilot's voice came back over comms. Slower now. Tower. Do we have identity on the operator? Name coming through. Registered pilot is Kelly Rourke. Civilian restoration authorization. No other log entries. The pilot leaned back in his seat. The name hit him harder than the number. He had grown up hearing that name. Not hers, her father's. The man who had flown into death and come back, alone, because someone had to. The man who never gave interviews, never took medals, never told the full story. And now his daughter was flying the same tail number through restricted airspace, steady as a stone. He broke formation slightly, just enough to line up canopy to canopy. For a brief moment, he saw her face, calm, focused, not smug, not shaken, just there. The silence on comms stretched. His wingman finally broke it with a whisper, "Lead, what do we do now?" He didn't answer immediately. Then his voice returned, lower, reverent, "We follow, until told otherwise." Kelly didn't react. She noticed the F-16s had shifted their posture slightly more distance, less aggression, but she chalked it up to formation dynamics. She adjusted heading, checking wind vectors. The old aircraft responded with a breath-like glide. The first pilot keyed his mic again, but the tone was different now. Respectful. Hesitant. "Ma'am, are you related to Major Paul Rourke?" The operations floor had grown quiet, not by command, but by the natural hush that comes when something ancient begins to stir beneath the surface. Monitors glowed with confirmation codes. Every IFF trace, every radar verification, every encrypted call sign had aligned. The aircraft in their airspace was tail number 880914. The name on the transponder matched the archived protocol. Rourke. Colonel Ava Hayes stood at the center of it all, headset lifted away from her ear, eyes fixed on the screen showing the live escort feed. The Warthog moved slowly across the desert sky, flanked now by two F-16s that had once mocked it. No one was mocking anything anymore. The pilot at the controls was not a stranger. She was the daughter of the man who had saved Hayes's life 25 years earlier. The comtech handed her the printed alert without speaking. Hayes took it with steady fingers. She didn't need to read the summary. She already knew. She had been a junior officer back then, part of a downed recon team pinned between two canyon ridgelines after a failed evac. Enemy fire had closed off all air routes. Helicopters couldn't risk the altitude. Fighter coverage was too fast, too wide. Every option had been declared off the table, except one. She remembered the sound of the A-10 before she ever saw it. It had echoed through the canyon like thunder with intent. She remembered crouching in dirt, her side bleeding from shrapnel, radio dead, smoke rising. She remembered looking up and seeing it cut the line between rock and sky. Just one aircraft, one man, no promise of extraction, just motion. The file on that mission had been sealed. It wasn't erased. It was preserved too sacred to turn into PR, too raw to dilute. Inside the doctrine that followed, its name had been codified quietly. The Rourke Protocol, low sky intervention, unbroken approach vectors, pilot discretion override in critical rescue scenarios. No pilot left, no airframe grounded if it could still fly. Hayes tapped the tablet beside her, pulling up the current mission log. The Warthog had re-entered her airspace not as a threat, but as a memory returning under call sign form. Kelly Rourke. Civilian authorization? Yes. But flying under the most protected tail number in her personal history, and in a world that often forgot who had built its foundation, this one did not. She turned to the floor officer. "Suspend all perimeter lockouts. Issue full legacy escort protocol." The officer blinked. "Colonel, you heard me. The tail number is not to be delayed, rerouted, or challenged. It is to be honored. Full clearance. Immediately." A junior tech near the back cleared her throat. "Ma'am, radar's lit it green. It's no longer flagged as an anomaly. The system recognizes it." Hayes nodded once, as it should. She moved to the main comm station and adjusted the headset. Her voice was calm, clipped, but laced with something deeper, something only a few on the channel would recognize. "Pilot of tail number 880914. This is Colonel Ava Hayes, Base Command. Confirm name." Kelly's voice came through after a pause. "Steady. This is Kelly Rourke, civilian pilot. I'm the daughter of Major Paul Rourke." Hayes looked out across the flight line from the windowed control tower. The sky outside was clean and wide, the kind of sky where history didn't need announcements. It simply showed up, flew a straight line, and reminded people who they were. She keyed the mic again. "You have full clearance, Kelly. Proceed on any heading you wish. Welcome home." There was no noise on the line for a long breath. Then Kelly responded, quieter now. "Thank you, Colonel." The escort formation adjusted without being told. The F-16s widened their gap slightly, not in defense, but in deference. A third aircraft joined the pattern without instruction, piloted by someone who had listened in silence and chosen respect. Inside the tower, the flight log updated on its own. The tail number no longer read unregistered. It bore a new tag historical return. Priority passage. under Rourke protocol. Hayes sat down at her desk. The moment had no fanfare, no dramatic announcement, just a memory settling into action. She reached into the drawer beside her and pulled out an old patch, one she hadn't looked at in over 2 decades. It showed a canyon outline, a crosshatch of flight path markings, and the word Monarch stitched in gold. She placed it gently beside the mission tablet, where the tail number now glowed in green. There had been a time when she thought no one would ever fly that aircraft again. And now, not only did it fly, it carried the bloodline that had built the doctrine Hayes had based her career upon. She stood once more and looked at the radar display. The A-10 held formation. It didn't speed up. It didn't climb. It simply continued. The comtech looked up, still watching the feed. "Colonel, do you want us to alert the press historical contact like this?" Hayes shook her head. "No press. Not yet. Let the pilots see her first. Let the base remember her the right way." The younger officer nodded, then added quietly, "Some of them never believed the original story. They will now," Hayes replied. And across the open airspace, Kelly's aircraft kept flying, bracketed by reverence instead of regulation. The base came into view beneath a sky so still it felt deliberate. The perimeter lights traced a soft curve around the runway, and the control tower stood like a quiet sentinel, no longer watching with suspicion, but waiting with purpose. Kelly adjusted the trim slightly. The A-10 Warthog obeyed without hesitation, descending with a stability that betrayed its age. There was no shake, no drift. It was as if the aircraft recognized the place. It had been here before, just under different hands. The tower cleared her for landing with a voice that held something more than instruction. It wasn't just airspace they were opening. It was space in memory. "Tail number 8, 80914. You are cleared for priority landing. Runway 26. Ground is standing by. Welcome home." The F-16s pulled wide, their escort pattern expanding into a ceremonial arch. Kelly didn't look toward them. She didn't need to. Their posture said more than words could. They had flown beside her. Now they flew behind. She touched down on the numbers, the landing gear meeting the tarmac with a low, confident thump. The tires rolled steady, flaps eased, and the aircraft slowed without resistance. As she taxied, she caught sight of the gathered personnel at the edge of the runway. It wasn't a formation. It wasn't planned. But it was there. Dozens of airmen, technicians, command officers, and support staff had left buildings and bays to line the path. They weren't waving. They weren't cheering. They stood at respectful attention, some with arms crossed, others with hands at their sides. Many wore old patches. A few wore none at all. When she reached the parking apron, ground crew signaled her to cut engines. She did. The turbines wound down in a slow, rattling spiral. The silence that followed was fuller than noise. She removed her helmet and set it on the dash, then opened the canopy and climbed down slowly. Her boots touched concrete with the weight of everything she had carried into that flight. She didn't look for cameras. There were none. She didn't look for applause. There was none. Only recognition. And that was more than enough. Colonel Ava Hayes approached first. She wore her uniform with the ease of someone who had spent her life in it. Her eyes met Kelly's without hesitation, and there was no protocol in her voice, only quiet memory. "I saw your father fly that tail number into a canyon when I was a junior officer. We thought no one would come for us. He did." Kelly nodded once. He never talked about it, only said it was the right thing to do. Hayes offered a small smile. "It was, and he didn't just bring us home. He gave us something to follow. I built most of my command doctrine on what he proved that day." Around them, the crowd stayed silent. Some of the older veterans stepped closer. One man reached out and touched the Warthog's fuselage with the back of his fingers, as if confirming it was real. Others nodded toward Kelly. There was no need for introductions. They knew exactly who she was. The 2 F-16 pilots walked toward her, flight helmets under their arms. The lead pilot removed his gloves before he spoke. "Ma'am, I want to apologize for earlier. We didn't know. And that's not an excuse. We just didn't know." Kelly didn't speak for a moment. She studied him the same way she had studied instrument panels, calm, without judgment. "You were doing your job," she said. "My father would have said the same." He nodded, but the emotion in his posture didn't release. "I've studied canyon hold in briefings. I didn't know the aircraft survived. I didn't know you were still flying it." She glanced back at the Warthog. "It's not about surviving. It's about continuing. He built it to fly until it couldn't. I just finished the work." Hayes gestured toward a hangar bay nearby. "We've set aside space. Maintenance wants to take a look at her, not because she needs it, but because she deserves it. And there's a briefing later this afternoon. A group of new pilots. They're learning rescue doctrine." Kelly raised an eyebrow slightly. Hayes gave the smallest nod. "They should hear it from you. Not the story. The reality." Kelly looked around the ramp. The sky had turned soft with afternoon light. A technician walked by, paused to glance at the tail number, and adjusted his salute. She didn't know if she belonged here, but the Warthog did. And that was enough. "I'll stay," she said. As the ground crew began moving around the aircraft with practiced care, someone rolled a utility cart to the side. On its surface was a worn fabric square, an old patch with the word Monarch in faded gold stitching. A younger officer approached, holding out a clipboard. His voice was steady, but his hands shook just enough to be noticed. "Ma'am, would you sign in on the heritage ledger? We only use it for aircraft tied to historical protocol. You're the first living pilot we've had for this one." She signed without flourish, placing the pen down with care. Behind her, the tail number still glinted against the backdrop of tarmac heat. It had been called obsolete. It had been dismissed. Now it had returned. Someone from the logistics team stepped closer. "Will you stay for the briefing? We've got new pilots. They should hear this from you." Kelly adjusted her gloves, fingers flexing slowly. "They should hear about the plane. The rest, they'll figure out." The call came on a Tuesday morning, quiet and clear. A forward scout team had gone dark during a live exercise near Redstone Canyon. Terrain interference had knocked out relay signals, and a rock slide triggered by early storm runoff had closed the access valley. Helicopters couldn't hover low enough. Drones lacked payload capacity. Jets couldn't slow down without risking collision in the narrow corridor. The team was pinned with no line of extraction. Satellite imagery confirmed it. The only flight profile that matched the conditions was one already written into the doctrine. A-10 Warthog. The command team didn't debate it long. The aircraft was on base. It was operational. The pilot had logged full recertification. Colonel Ava Hayes made the call herself. Kelly said yes without hesitation. She didn't ask for mission parameters. She didn't request a camera crew or ground press or legacy footage. She asked for wind data, pressure readings, and access to the terrain maps her father had marked decades earlier. The route was dangerous, but it wasn't impossible. She would fly low, slow, and deliberate, the same way he had. The Warthog rolled onto the tarmac under pre-dawn light, its dull gray frame gleaming slightly from the overnight mist. The paint had been retouched, but the tail number still showed the original stenciling, 880914. No embellishment, no tribute markings, just fact. The escort team assembled quickly. 2 F-16s from her original intercept flight asked to fly alongside. No one questioned it. The sky belonged to the mission, not the rank. She climbed in, checked systems, and tapped the checklist card once. The edges were soft now, the crease more pronounced than before, but the words remained legible. She didn't read them. She didn't need to. They launched in sequence. The canyon air took them in like a memory. The A-10 led, the fighters held above and behind, their presence not commanding but protective. As they approached the drop point, the terrain narrowed. Kelly dialed her instruments back manually, relying on the pressure in the stick and the muscle memory of every hour she had flown that aircraft. The trees blurred below. Wind skated across the fuselage like breath. She brought the aircraft down to 70 feet. The canyon bent. She bent with it. Radio contact was re-established with the scout team just past the fourth ridge. They were pinned near a small basin, short on water and waiting without guarantee. The tone in their voices shifted when they heard what was inbound. One of them, older than the others, asked if it was the same Warthog he had seen in his first training film. He recognized the shape. Kelly released the emergency drop payload with calm precision. Supplies landed within a 2-meter range, enough to keep them alive until rescue vehicles moved in from the south slope. She circled once more to confirm visual and signal alignment. No grand message, no overhead pass, just confirmation. The F-16s tightened formation again, flying wide and slow as they turned north. The canyon let them go. Back at base, the runway stayed clear. The tower had been monitoring everything. The final call came over standard frequency. Tail number 880914. Mission status confirmed. You are clear to return. Full approach authority. Kelly landed with the same patience she had always used. No rush. No signature swoop. The A-10 touched down like a question being answered. The personnel waiting on the apron didn't crowd the aircraft. They stood at distance, letting the shape of it settle into the space. One technician removed his cap. One flight crew officer placed his hand on the log panel. She shut the aircraft down, removed her helmet, and stepped out into the afternoon light. The sky had cleared. The air carried no weight. Inside operations, the doctrine database updated the log. Under the Rourke protocol header, a new addendum was added. Rourke continuation clause. It read simply, protocol remains active when legacy aircraft and proven pilots meet mission parameters under terrain-restricted conditions. Status ongoing. Kelly walked into the debrief room, signed the mission ledger, and took the checklist card from her pocket. She folded it once along the crease. Then she placed it back where it belonged. No ceremony, no photographs, just continuity. As she stepped onto the flight line again, someone called out from behind. You ever think about teaching the new squads asking who flew that pass? Kelly turned slightly. Tell them it was the Warthog. She said, they'll understand. Then she walked the rest of the way across the tarmac, slow and steady, as the tail number faded into evening light.